Hi, I'm Chris Sarandon, and welcome to Cooking by Heart, where we revisit the vivid memories of the food we grew up with.
I couldn't believe the tastes and the flavors.
Lydia Bastianich. Hi, Chris. Susan Sarandon.
And the people and the stories attached to that time in our lives.
I was the one sort of like mommy dearest.
He'd order one side of the menu and eat that. And then when he was finished eating that, he'd order the other side of the menu and eat all of that. Emptied the kitchen.
Today, my very special guest is Jill Eikenberry. Jill Eikenberry is perhaps best known for her portrayal of Ann Kelsey in NBC's long-running hit series, L.A. Law, which earned Jill 4 Emmy nominations, 2 Golden Globe nominations, and a Golden Globe Award. Jill has starred on Broadway in Moonchildren, All Over Town, Summer Brave, Watch on the Rhine, and Onward Victoria, and she's won Off-Broadway's Obie Award for Life Underwater and Lemon Sky. More recently, her New York appearances have been in The Kid, for which she received a Drama Desk nomination, Evening in the Talk House by Wallace Shawn, and Fern Hill by her husband, actor-author Michael Tucker. This past year, Jill and Michael appeared in a film version of his play, The Nice Man Cometh. Jill's feature films include Butch and Sundance, The Early Days, Rich Kids, Hide in Plain Sight, The Manhattan Project, and Arthur, starring Dudley Moore, among many others. She's also starred in numerous television movies, including An Inconvenient Woman, Chantilly Lace, and the sequel, Chantilly Bridge, which is currently streaming on Amazon Prime. Recently also, she's been a guest star on The Good Fight and had a guest starring role in the pilot for a reboot of L.A. Law. After her own successful treatment for breast cancer, she co-produced a documentary for NBC television called Destined to Live, which featured interviews with cancer survivors. She remains an activist for cancer research and prevention. I'm very proud and happy to welcome my guest on Cooking by Heart, Jill Eikenberry. Hi, Jill.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Now, I always start the show, as you may know, because your husband Mike has been on it, that we talk about provenance. We talk about where we're from, because so much of our upbringing, our cooking, has to do with where we're from. And yours is quite varied. Tell us about it.
I was born in New Haven, Connecticut.
Right.
Because my father was at the Yale Law School.
Mm.
My first year was in a Quonset hut.
What?
Yeah. We had those little Quonset huts for the GIs, you know.
Yep.
And
now, when you say he was at Yale Law School, he was a student or was he a faculty member?
he was a student at the law school, but he had just been in the Navy. He had been a captain in the Navy. So it was after World War II, and he was back, and he got his, the GI Bill helped pay for his furthering education in law.
Yeah.
He finished that, and then the three of us moved to Madison, Wisconsin. I lived in Madison, up until first or second grade.
Was he practicing law there?
No. He took the bar, the Wisconsin bar, which is, I guess, notoriously hard, and he took it 3 times, and he was really shocked that he didn't pass it, because he thought he would. And when he finally did pass it, he decided, that he was going to do something else. He was just really discouraged. So he went into insurance and joined American Family. It was then called Farmers Mutual, American Family Life Insurance Company, which is still going. And sort of the course of his career was that he rose up in the company to become a regional manager. And hence, we did a lot of moving around. I wasn't an army kid, but we did a lot of moving around because I was in Madison until first grade, and then moved to Kansas City, Kansas, where he was being prepared for this executive, job. And then Kansas City, Missouri, and then back to Madison for 4th and 5th grades, and then to St. Joseph, Missouri, which is where he was going to start this new company, and did. My parents separated when I was 14, and my mother and I moved back to Madison. So it was like, this is the sort of concept.
Right.
my first 6 years of school were all in different places.
Wow.
I moved every year, so it was sort of like an army brat. I was moving every year.
Right, right. We'll get into that a little bit more later because I've always been interested in the psychological effects of having to move a lot when you're very, very young. But in the meantime, let's talk culinary.
Yeah.
Was Mom the mainstay at home and the cook?
She worked a lot. She almost always worked, but she was the cook also. She did various different jobs, a lot of them in social work kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
But she always was the cook as well. And, not a bad cook, I wouldn't say. But the funny thing about my childhood was that my dad didn't like chicken or fish. He only liked meat.
Oy.
Various kinds of meat.
Mm-hmm.
Living in Kansas City, that was where cows were king,
The hub, right.
I knew a lot about cows back then. I knew about Black Angus and all these different cows that were the ones that you used for steaks and this and that. And my parents at one point bought a giant freezer and had a side of beef in there, where they would take pieces of it all the time. So they
would butcher their own?
No, they had the side of beef sort of cut into.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Cut.
Pre-butchered.
Yeah, but it was very meat-worthy cuisine all the time, and I loved it. And my favorite thing was my mom's pork roast. Oh my God, I do feel like pork doesn't taste like it used to in this country. Pork, it was just the sweetest, most. And I remember sort of stealing pieces of the pork roast, just like coming into the kitchen and slicing off. It was so.
Well, that's the best part, anyway. Yeah. Both
of my parents also, their lineage was German, from many generations back, but still, his family had his favorite food was sauerbraten.
Mm.
We had that a lot. My mom made.
Can you describe more specifically what sauerbraten is? Because I'm sure a number of people in my audience don't really know.
It's like a roast beef meat, but it's marinated with a lot of vinegar, and so there's a sour taste.
Right.
But it's marinated for a long time. So not only is it marinated for a long time, and then it's roasted for a long time, so it falls off the bone, which was my favorite thing about that. That kind of dish. I loved sauerbraten, and I loved my grandmother's pot roast, which also fell off the bone. That velvety, soft meat was just something I adored.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad loved potatoes of any kind. So my mom, we just had a lot of meat and potatoes, including for breakfast. There'd be sausages and bacon and corned beef hash. And, it was just a very, very meat-heavy diet all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
My favorite sandwich was a BLT. The more bacon, the better. I was just really.
Oh, yeah. I was the same way when I was a kid, with bacon particularly. The less cooked the bacon was, the better I liked it.
Yeah, so fat.
Yes.
I think we're talking about fat.
Well, fat is flavor. We all know that. Yes.
Yeah.
And also the knowledge that high cholesterol and saturated fat were not particularly good for one's health just didn't exist then.
No, it was absolutely not. And I imagine that the beef that was raised in those stockyards in Kansas City was a lot better quality than is available now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the cattle were being infused with chemicals, hormones and stuff.
Yep.
I think it was
antibiotics.
Yeah, I think it was a purer entity and so tasty. It was something I craved, and I didn't miss chicken or fish. I know when I went out to a suburb of Kansas City called Prairie Village, we'd go out to Butch's Cafeteria, and I would have chicken a la king, which was a big treat for me because I got to have something other than beef.
Right.
Chicken and biscuits, boy, that was,
Oh, yeah.
That kind of it was a southern feel.
Yeah.
Southern feel.
Yeah, exactly.
But then I was also in Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
So, the other times when I was in Wisconsin is where I got my cheese fixation.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I became obsessed with cheese, and the Wisconsin cheddar. It was just one of the greatest things I ever had in my life, and I
Still is.
couldn't get enough. Couldn't get enough. So cholesterol was my main
Right.
and eggs and cheese and everything in cheese. My dad loved twice baked potatoes with the cheese, mashed up into the cheese, and then you put them back in the oven.
Butter in there somewhere, probably.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about the butter. That was big. The thing I loved the most that my mother made was that sort of old-fashioned cheesecake with the really fabulous graham cracker crust and so rich. It was just...
I just saw a recipe, for instance. I was just strolling through the internet last night while watching the Olympics, and there was a cheesecake recipe, and I just sat there and just kind of drooled over, first of all, the ingredients of sour cream and cream cheese and eggs and, all the stuff that we know is not particularly good for us, but that we have to have, right?
Yeah.
And the crushed strawberries on top. And oh, my God, folks.
I can still taste it.
Yeah.
I can still taste that incredible texture of my mother's cheesecake. Oh, wow.
Any other favorites that you remember that Mom cooked? She would come home from work and do this, or set things up in the morning and then...
She had sort of her stuff planned out for the week, and she did have that big freezer.
Right.
So in terms of vegetables, it was always frozen vegetables, always, even though, we were, there were farms everywhere, but we were always eating frozen vegetables. But we considered that a great luxury because they weren't canned. Yeah, in fact, the fact is they were fresher.
Yes. Yeah. There was still some taste residing in it rather than it's being sopped completely. Yeah, flabby in the can.
We thought we were really kind of avant-garde in that regard. In that sense, we weren't getting the cans off the supermarket shelves.
Yeah.
But she had tons of stuff in the freezer, so I think probably what her prep was in the morning was to take things out of the freezer that she was going to cook that night. Mm-hmm. And then we do a big shop and fill up the freezer. And then, I think that was...
The cycle would start again.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously you were in school, even though you were in different schools, kind of back and forth.
Yeah.
First of all, when you went to school, did Mom pack a lunch or did you eat at school?
I ate at school. I remember the school cafeterias very well.
And do you remember if there was a big difference in the food in Wisconsin, Missouri, Kansas, whatever, wherever you were at the particular time?
I remember we weren't too crazy about the food anywhere in the cafeteria line, but, there was always something. Lots of
steam table.
Yeah, franks and beans, that kind of stuff. And I don't think they were bad. I mean, the things I remember loving to do would be to go to the drive-in root beer stand, Eikenberry or whatever, and get root beer floats and get sandwiches from the root beer stand. That was just such an incredible treat. Mm-hmm. Or go to Dairy Queen and that kind of stuff. That was the great treat. But I don't remember school lunches as being anything to brag about. But no, there's no such thing as Mom making lunch. That did not happen.
Well, and also there was no time. She was a working mom. The
other thing that was so fun for me was that I would go every summer to my Aunt Treva's farm, my mom's oldest sister, in Ohio, and it was a dairy farm.
Oh.
I would get to milk the cows every day. And then we would go get the eggs from the chickens and take them on her egg route in her little car. She'd drive all the neighbors and get them their eggs. Then we'd go out and get the cows when it was time to bring them back to the barn. And she had all kinds of vegetables growing. I don't remember having a single fresh vegetable while I was there.
Really?
But she canned everything, and she had rows and rows of jars of things in the basement that she had canned of all these fresh vegetables, fresh fruit. I remember the rhubarb and the applesauce. And then she'd invite all the neighbors to come and help her with her harvesting, of the wheat or whatever she was harvesting.
Yeah.
And serve all these bowls filled with these things, these canned things, creamed corn, all these canned things that she had done.
Mm-hmm.
I thought they were delicious.
Oh, well, they sound great.
But it never occurred to me that I could actually get a vegetable out of the garden and eat it. It had to be cooked, boiled forever, and made into something that you could put in a jar. That was what you did.
Yeah. Well, obviously, she came from a tradition where that occurred, and also that food preservation in the many years before that, you didn't have a big, huge sub-zero refrigerator to put everything in, or a freezer as you guys had when you lived in the city in Madison.
Yeah.
So the tradition was much more about, we have to figure out ways to preserve, be it in a root cellar or canned or whatever.
Yeah, and I'm sure she added plenty of sugar to everything, which is why I liked it so much.
You really loved it.
Incredible.
And I can't take this image out of my mind of little Jill sitting on a stool milking a cow.
Oh, it was great. I loved it. I loved that. I just loved the cows. I was in love with all of them. And the little cats and kittens that were born in the barn. My cousin always came with me, and he would just, and give a little milk to the kittens. And it was just, it was heavenly. And I adored my aunt. I adored her. She was just round and jolly, and it was just a real treat. She had 8 children of her own, but they were all grown. So we were the newbies.
Wow.
We were the little kids that she had around.
Was she much older than your mom?
Yeah, she was the oldest. My mom was the youngest of 6. So
I see.
She had her kids were grown and mostly gone, and so she liked having kids around. So she enjoyed it.
Now, did your mom grow up on a farm?
No. My grandfather, he was a carpenter. So, they were definitely blue collar, and my grandmother was her mom was, I remember her killing the chickens in the backyard, and then they would run around the backyard with their heads cut off.
Yeah.
I thought that was the coolest thing. And
as only a bloodthirsty child would.
Better than TV, But
I have that experience too. When I was growing up at the restaurant, there was an abattoir in the back alley behind the restaurant, and they killed chickens constantly. That's where my dad got his chickens, and literally, whack, and the chicken would be off and running.
I know. It's just how did that work? It was just so strange. But I always remember looking forward to it. That was the blue collar part of the family, and they with the 6 kids and everything. And my grandfather, the carpenter, who was a wonderful carpenter, and he was up on the roof still when he was in his 80s. He was just a real craftsman. He actually helped my mother make a room-sized loom. My mother was a weaver.
Wow.
Whenever we moved from one house to another, we would carry this giant loom and find a room for it so that she could do her weaving.
Wow.
She was very, very into, artistic endeavors, crafts and things. And she was a wonderful weaver. And I have had many beautiful things that she made for me out of fabric. And I still have something hanging by the piano that she a woven piece of hers. What a great way to grow up. Yeah, it was
aside from all the moving.
Right, yeah. It was wonderful to have that family. My grandfather, they were Church of the Brethren, and my grandfather read the Bible before dinner. It was such a Midwestern, Whereas my father's parents, my grandfather was a professor of psychology at their very small college in Indiana, North Manchester, Indiana. My grandmother was, always very prim and had, very well dressed. And my other grandmother was everything was just flying all the time. But this grandmother was very put together and very prim, and they only had 2 children. But she also was just an incredibly wonderful cook, and not only did she make that pot roast, which I loved so much, but my favorite thing is I would race to when I went to visit I would race to the basement because in the basement refrigerator was a big jar of very large, fat chocolate drops with like a minty, wonderful filling. And we would go for our family picnics, and I would make peanut butter sandwiches with sliced chocolate drops.
Oh, my.
My favorite.
Oh.
Can you believe that I wasn't obese? I mean, really.
Did you've remained slim all through these years?
I was relatively so until I got to college. And then I had such a tradition of eating rich things.
Right.
And when I was in college with all the pressure and everything, I ate more of them. So I kind of ballooned up for a while.
I see. Now, when you were younger, do you recall, because you have this kind of meat-centric diet at home, and you talked about going out and having, chicken and whatever it was when you went out, were there any sort of major food discoveries that occurred while you were a kid growing into a teen?
The thing I remember most vividly was when I was a high school girl in Madison, and my friend, kind of boyfriend, Steve, had just gone fishing, and he brought back trout, and he pan-fried the trout in his kitchen so that I could have it. And I had never tasted fresh fish.
Wow.
I had fish sticks.
Yes.
Was my experience of fish because my mom didn't cook it at home.
Yeah.
I was so blown away by this unbelievably fresh piece of lake trout from Wisconsin that I never, ever forgot it. It was like, that's fish?
This is the thing that was an anathema at home?
Exactly.
Wow. Oh, sounds wonderful.
That was a big discovery for me. Yeah.
Yeah. So you finished high school, and by the way, basically experiencing the same kind of cafeteria food at school.
Yeah, it was always cafeteria.
Yeah. Steam table, basically the same kind of lineup.
Lots of sloppy joes.
Oh, yeah.
Sloppy joes.
Well,
oh, yeah.
But sloppy joes are actually kind of great.
They're kind of great if they're done well,
Yeah.
but if they're done for 1,000 kids, it's not.
No. And I'll never forget when I don't know if you ever had the experience, when I took my youngest child off to colleges, and he and I were visiting colleges, and the first one we went to was my alma mater. Uh-huh. And I remembered what the food was like when I was there, which was, in the early 60s. This is obviously much, much later. And we go to the cafeteria, and I couldn't believe the array of food that was available. It just blew my mind, and also so well prepared and so nutritious, and the choices, I just thought, oh, God, where was I? Yeah. Although I did have the opportunity to be in my father's restaurant for those many years, so I had a variety there, but not the same thing.
I have a great cafeteria story.
Oh.
When I went to Barnard for 2 years. That was my first getting out of the Midwest, and other than where I was born in New Haven. But I went to Barnard for 2 years and lived in the dorm, and we had the cafeteria in the basement. I was up on Broadway and Broadway and 110th, that area. Mm-hmm. There was a blind girl that lived on our floor. And she was my friend, and we did things together. I was there during one of the huge, huge blackouts.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
She and I were on our way to dinner in the elevator when the blackout occurred.
Oy.
But fortunately, it had just arrived, and the doors opened. And there we were in pitch black in the cafeteria. Well, I ate very well that night. She knew where everything was, and she helped me get my food, and we had a delicious meal.
What a wonderful picture this is.
Isn't that amazing?
Is there a short story there, or a short film or something of the blind girl leading you around in the blackout, feeding you?
Isn't that fabulous?
This is extraordinary.
Okay, over here are the vegetables. This is where you get your It's just amazing. Got me to my table, and we sat there and had a lovely. Everybody else was running around in a panic, and we were just sitting having a wonderful
stuffing yourselves,
meal.
Right?
Exactly.
Oh, how great.
Not bad.
Oh, great. You finished college. Were you off to Yale the drama school then?
Yeah, after 2 years of Barnard, I went to Yale Drama School. I auditioned for Yale. I really was feeling, I was doing a lot of stuff in college. I was doing a lot of theatrical experiences in college. And honestly, what happened was that I played Ophelia in Hamlet at Columbia, which is across the street. And
we're talking New York City for our audience. Yeah. Right.
Columbia is across the street from Barnard, which was a girls' school, and Columbia was a boys' school, and now they're all mixed up.
Oh.
I was involved in the Shakespeare production at Columbia, and I was having an amazing time playing Ophelia. But I had been a kid who, just to diverge for a minute, my parents separated when I was 14. I didn't know anybody else with divorced parents. I was absolutely devastated by my father's leaving. I was a wreck. But I didn't show it, ever. Show anything. My mother always said I was her rock. I never showed any emotion of any kind. I was playing Ophelia, and I was working in my dorm on the speech that she has about Hamlet, where she says, "Oh, what a noble mind is here o'erthrown," about how he's leaving her, essentially abandoning her because he's becoming crazy. And I just found myself weeping, these huge crocodile tears coming down my face. And I just didn't do that. And I think that was the beginning of my idea that maybe there was something for me in being an actor, because I needed to be able to feel something.
Yeah. Yes.
And so when the opportunity arose to audition for Yale Drama School, I took it, and I left my undergrad situation and went to Yale, which was then a conservatory, for 3 years to get your MFA. So that's what I did.
For my listeners and viewers, a little background, because at that time, and it's changed somewhat over the years, there were sort of three preeminent programs in the country. There was Carnegie Tech, which became Carnegie Mellon, Yale Drama School, and then the place that I went, which was always the third choice for most students, was Catholic University.
Right.
And they all had Master of Fine Arts programs in acting, which nobody else did. And they were considered to, if you got in there, you were like, your career was made. It wasn't necessarily, but that was the feeling.
Oh, but it set me on a path. I mean, that I got in, which I didn't expect to.
Right.
Made me realize that this is it. This is what I was doing.
Yeah. And it was also pre-Juilliard, I think.
Yes.
It was before Juilliard became the kind of the place where everybody wanted to go.
Yeah.
So that you're in New Haven, any changes there in terms of, were you living with someone in an apartment in New Haven? Were you cooking?
The first year I was living with a group of girls at a big house that we, that people rented to students.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we all cooked, for each other and for ourselves. But it was kind of fly by the,
Well, because everybody's leaving at a different time. Yeah,
exactly. It was very
coming and going.
Yeah, it wasn't very interesting food. But what did happen in New Haven was that I really discovered Chinese food. The restaurants, and there were some really good Chinese restaurants in New Haven, and
oh, really?
We would get stuff to bring home and take out and that kind of thing. They were pretty reasonable. Really adored that. New Haven is now, the pizza mecca. Everybody wants to go to New Haven for pizza. I don't remember that as much as I remember the Chinese. And there was a diner that I liked to frequent. But yeah, I think a lot of what I cooked for myself was eggs. Eggs and this, eggs and that, eggs and toast, because they were cheap. Yep. Eggs and cheese, eggs and Eggs were a big. I always had an egg every morning for breakfast. Mm-hmm. I mean, eggs were my mainstay.
Well, it's versatile. You basically do anything with an egg, and it's also high in protein, high in food value. Mm-hmm. So you're cooking for yourself. How did New York happen?
I finished Yale Drama School, and the first job I got right out of Yale was in Washington D.C. at Arena Stage. Wonderful regional theater.
Yeah.
Still really wonderful.
And I was there at approximately the same time at Catholic U.
Catholic U.
Yeah.
Mike, my husband, happened to be in the company there too, so that's where we met. And Mike was a foodie, already. I mean, he knew that food was really important to him. He loved food, and we ended up getting together.
Oh, yeah.
We just celebrated our 50th last.
Right. One of the great long-term marriages in the world.
But he really introduced me to food in a way that I didn't understand it. I mean, he was from Baltimore. He knew a lot about shellfish, for example, crab. I didn't know what a blue crab was. I didn't really know much about shellfish at all. And he loved shrimp. He loved cooking those things. He had learned to cook, as I think he told you. He'd learned to cook spaghetti when he was at Carnegie Tech, because his cousin's brother-in-law was Philip Glass, the great composer, and he taught Mike how to know when the spaghetti was done by throwing it against the wall.
Right.
So Mike had a whole thing about spaghetti, which I didn't know anything about, nothing about spaghetti. But he just started he had cookbooks. He had this wonderful, wonderful cookbook by Roy Andries de Groot called Feast for All Seasons. And he would read to me from the cookbook. And I was like, wow, you can do that with food. He became a mentor to me, this Roy Andries de Groot. I wanted to know everything he had to say. But I developed my culinary desires and also some skill during that time. And I also, we were at Arena Stage for a couple of years, and then we came to Broadway with the play, and then ended up in New York.
Was that Moon Children?
Yes.
Yeah.
And
wonderful play.
It wasn't a success on Broadway. It was a success off Broadway. No thanks to us, but but it got us to New York and Chinese food, and that was such a wonderful thing to do in New York because it was inexpensive and so interesting, and I loved Szechuan and all that. But one year for Christmas, I gave Mike cooking lessons with Florence Lin at the China Institute. He happened to be quite busy doing some kind of acting work. And so I ended up taking a lot of the courses. And Florence Lin taught me how to do the thing that Mike is so good at, and I know you are so good at, which is to do your mise en place, do all the stuff you need to do to prepare yourself to cook that dish in the wok. Make all your little bowls of this and that and this and that. I just thought that was fascinating. And she taught me how to create that. Not that I'm, an expert at it, but it helped me understand, just the process of cooking, how to organize it. And it was wonderful.
Yeah, I guess my approach, you may have a slightly romanticized look at a version of what my mise en place is, because it's mostly mental.
Yeah.
I have a mental thing. It's basically thought out ahead, but I don't organize it. Joanna does that, by the way. She's great at it, my wife, Joanna Gleason. So then these sort of culinary adventures, both with Mike and having the availability in New York City of the world, you have Chinatown, you have Little Italy, it's an extraordinary place to experience food.
Exactly.
Then, and I'm jumping a bit, you and Mike find yourself in a big, huge Mongo television series hit. How did that happen?
Well, Mike had gone to Carnegie Tech, which, as you mentioned, was one of the big drama schools of the time, with a fellow named Stephen Bochco. And he created Hill Street Blues on for NBC, which was this giant, amazing hit, but also so innovative, such a new thing. And he was still our friend, and he came to New York with his then wife, and asked us if we would be interested in playing a couple of parts on Hill Street Blues of a couple that comes to New York, and like a funny thing, really, sort of based on the Out-of-Towners with Sandy Duncan and Jack Lemmon, where they come to New York and all these horrible things happen to them. They get robbed. But it's funny,
Yeah. It's great movie.
He wondered if we would be interested in doing a two-parter on Hill Street Blues. And we did, and we had a great time. We'd never really worked together. So we didn't really know if we liked working together or if that would even be fun. And it was. It turned out to be sort of an audition for him to see how we worked together and to see whether the chemistry on screen was good.
Because he already had the idea.
He was working on a new show, and he didn't tell us about it right then. But a few months later, he called and he said, I've got a script here for a new show I'm working on about lawyers. And the first thing he said was, I want to write a script about this new show for this new show on NBC about lawyers, and I would like to write these two parts with you guys in mind, if that's okay.
Oy, God.
And I said, I don't really want to do a series. I'm a theater actor. And Mike is over in the corner grimacing at me. Are you nuts? And I said, he said, I know. But I'd like to have somebody in mind when I write the part. So I said, all right,
what the heck?
You need that. And then a couple of months later, the NBC courier knocked on our front door in our apartment, and we had these scripts, and I was in the dining room, and Mike was sitting in the living room, and I was reading the script in the dining room, and Mike looked in and he noticed that I was learning the lines. I think we're going to Los Angeles. And I just loved this part. I was like, that's always the hook for me, as it is for many actors. I was like, I'm not going to let someone else play this.
Exactly.
So off we go to LA, and we shoot the pilot, and it's just this dream of this incredible script and these amazing, wonderful actors and the sets and the clothes that were made for us. And here we are, these poor actors in New York.
Yes,
and all of a sudden we're just having this extraordinary gift of this show. We thought, well, it's probably too good. It's not probably going to go. It won't get picked up.
Right.
But it did. And the idea was that because of Hill Street Blues, pretty much he already had his track record. And so we were going to go back to New York and get ourselves together, pack our lives up, our kids. By that time, our daughter was in high school. Our son was 4. There's a 12-year age difference. So we were going to bring him. We ultimately decided not to bring her because she wanted to finish high school there. So we arranged for her to have her last year there with all her friends. And anyway, so we got back to New York and we're doing all that. And one day I'm driving in my car for some reason in New York. I can't remember why. And I reached up and I felt a lump in my breast. And I wasn't good at checking myself at all.
Right. You weren't regularly doing the palpation that they recommend.
I didn't know what made me do it, but I did it, and it was terrifying. Right away. Sure enough, it was breast cancer. I was told that I would need to do a lumpectomy and have radiation. Mike called Stephen Bachko and said, we can't do the show. Jill has breast cancer. And Stephen said, no, go ahead and take a breath, but let me call you back. And he called him back a day later and he said, do the surgery. My dear friend out here at UCLA in radiology is going to take care of the radiation. Come out here, do the show. We'll arrange for Jill to get off the set, every day when she needs to for her radiation therapy. Nobody will have to know what it's about. We'll just, he just took care of us. He just comes around us and just said, this is going to be okay. And it was
extraordinary.
Absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. I mean, because we were terrified. We really felt like it was a death sentence back then. Nobody was talking about surviving it,
Right. Yeah. My mom went through this many years before, and it was, you're done.
Yeah. The big C.
Except there were people who were saying, no, look at the data. Right. Because outcomes are still basically the same with less draconian surgeries, et cetera, et cetera. There was stuff out there. It just wasn't common knowledge. Yeah.
I didn't even know that my Aunt Treva, whose farm I had, been to every summer, had breast cancer in her 40s and had had a radical mastectomy where they took the chest wall and everything. And she was still, on the tractor 40 years later. I didn't even know that because she never talked about it. Nobody talked about it.
Yep.
So it was absolutely a big secret. But Botchko was so reassuring, and we did. We went out there, and I got off work every day, and nobody knew. They didn't, because there were a number of us in the show. It wasn't weird that I wasn't there.
Right. It was an ensemble cast.
Yeah. So nobody knew about it. And, I think it was 6 or 8 weeks of radiation. And it didn't take that much of a toll on me,
Surprisingly.
I didn't feel like it did because I also had all this excitement and this energy for this new project.
Yeah.
It wasn't until about a year later that I realized that the radiation was finally starting to leave my body and I had a lot more energy. Mm-hmm. I didn't think about it then.
And adrenaline was sort of taking over
exactly
for what you were lacking, yeah.
But anyway, it was quite a time. I mean, and then the show became a huge hit, and so we were dealing with immortality and mortality in the same
right.
And it was really something.
A real roller coaster, but one that ultimately, as we see, because we're sitting here and talking, this is how many years ago?
1986. That was 1986.
Right.
Yeah, here I am. Mm. The other thing that happened is that I had a recurrence. Mm-hmm. 2009.
Right.
A tiny little thing that they felt was probably left over from the first one because it was right in the same place, and probably the radiation there was an errant cell or something.
Yeah.
They all took that out, and I'm still fine. Didn't have to have radiation, can't have radiation the second time on the same breast.
Right.
But I had to take a medication called an aromatase inhibitor to keep the estrogen low this second time. And that raised my cholesterol. And my cholesterol had never been an issue, but suddenly it was. And so my doctors said, you'll have to take a statin for that. And I was like, well, I don't like the idea of taking a drug because I'm being affected by another drug. Is there any other way to talk about this? And my doctor, who was a holistic doctor as well in New York, said, what about trying a vegan diet? So I did. Mm-hmm. So this meat and potatoes girl,
the irony,
went the exact opposite direction. Mm-hmm. And I was a vegan for about 10 years, and it really did lower my cholesterol. But it also became a bit of a revelation to me because my digestion was so much better eating that way. Mm. We subsequently got a house in Italy, and I started to be there twice a year and eat that Mediterranean diet, which is so good for a vegan, with olive oil and
pasta.
Yeah, pasta and vegetables.
But also lots of vegetables, lots of fish, some chicken, but
all these fresh vegetables and all this wonderful stuff. And my digestion just got way better. So it was almost like, this was always maybe what I should have been doing. Mm-hmm. I'm no longer a strict vegan. I now eat fish and shellfish and some cheese here and there and stuff like that.
Right.
I did not go back to meat. I did not. Mm-hmm. And it's not recommended for somebody who's had breast cancer twice to be eating meat. It's not recommended.
I was going to say that not only is there the cholesterol issue, but also that there is some indication with the research that diets that are high in saturated fat are not great for cancer prevention.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And also the estrogen, I don't eat chicken. I mean, I know that that's very possible to get chicken without hormones, but I don't want estrogen in my body. But I'm happy. I'm having a wonderful time with my food, and I don't feel the loss of it. Even when Mike still loves his meat. Mm-hmm. He makes a good steak, and I smell it, and I don't crave it. I'm surprised.
Yes.
Because it's a good part of my childhood to be eating that meat, but
right.
I don't miss it.
And sort of concurrently with what was going on in the show with LA Law, and the fact that it was kind of blowing up into the culture, you guys were also experiencing some major kind of culinary adventures. I mean, Mike was cooking with Julia Child, whom he talks about in season 1 of Cooking by Heart, this extraordinary experience that he had with Julia.
Right.
And you guys are at times, subsequent to the show, you moved to Northern California, the sort of the seat of the farm to table movement in this country.
Got to know Alice Waters, who you interviewed. Yeah.
Yes, right. Whom concluded my season 2. So you were kind of riding the crest of that wave at the same time. That healthier approach to
fresh vegetables, fresh, the fresh way of
and everything in season.
Right, exactly. And in Italy, that's just how they eat. You know, you don't have greens unless they were foraged from the winter landscape because they're fresh.
Yeah.
In the wintertime, they don't serve, all those greens.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a new way of eating. It's wonderful.
And I must talk about something that Jill and I have in common. In my much sort of distant past, I was in a band in high school, and I was a drummer. Just fairly recently, not in the, like immediately recent past, but fairly recently, Jill and Mike have a son who is a professional drummer who's extraordinary player. And Jill decided, please tell us what you decided to do.
Well, about 10 years ago, our son Max was looking to start teaching. Mm-hmm. And he was on the East Coast then. He's now in Portland, Oregon, but he was on the East Coast, and he was actually, going to be living in our barn for a year, sort of trying to figure out how to get this teaching thing going. So I became a student of his because I thought, well, he needs students. I had played the piano all my life, but not brilliantly at all.
And you sing, by the way. You're musical, yes.
Yeah. So I started taking drums, and I thought that I was doing it for him because he would need students. Mm-hmm. Turns out he's turned into a fabulous teacher as well as a brilliant musician. I continued to take drum lessons when he moved to Portland on Zoom. And so I've been taking from him for, 8 some years. And it turns out to be the most therapeutic and wonderful thing I've ever done for myself. I absolutely love the drums. And I have a little jazz trio that meets in our barn every once in a while, like every couple of months. But I'm going to start being in a regular situation every week, the VFW in Westport, with the jazz rabbi who's going to work with an amateur ensemble. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to start to be able to do it on a regular basis, play with other people. And it's just amazing, partly because it's jazz. So it's all about understanding what you want to say musically, as well as and not just interpret.
Yes.
Just, I've only just interpreted before. And so it's about finding a creative spark in myself that I didn't know I had.
It's also, and I think of it in terms of the great acting that we all feel strongly about, which is about listening and being in sync with other people while you're creating something together.
Right, exactly.
Jazz is very much like that because it's improvisational on the one hand, as is acting in the sense that despite the fact that you are on a script and you're reading the author's lines, mm-hmm. It's different all the time.
Right.
Because you are always reacting to what's actually going on with the players that you're playing with, right. Which is the analog to music and playing with a group.
I think, a lot of us that are artists are drawn to that idea that it's always different. You don't know what's going to happen. Yep. Even in the kitchen, exactly. You don't always know what's going to happen.
Thank you for drawing that. Yeah.
The creative endeavor and you've got to be able to take the leap a lot of the time. Mm-hmm. I still love to be able to do it. Even though I'm, getting older, I still like to take the leap.
Yeah. And you are to be much commended because you also have to overcome at some point the fear that, oh, I can't do this.
Yeah.
This is something totally new.
Right.
This is something that I have no idea how to do. And it's good for your brain. It's also good for your soul.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
It is. Playing the drums, with having to have all four limbs independent,
yep.
it is really good. Is good for your brain in a whole embodied way. That's really interesting.
Yeah. You're inspiring me to go back.
I think you should, Chris.
I know.
We need you. We need you in the barn.
So, Jill.
Yes.
If there's a moment in your life, be it currently or through the years, when you experience a taste or a smell or just a gathering that takes you back to a time when you were younger, that is very evocative, that is a lovely memory, food memory, what would that be?
One of the things that I love about this time of year is that we're able to get such great apples. And having apples with cheese. So I grew up a lot in Wisconsin,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I learned about apples and cheese in the fall. A sharp cheddar.
Yeah.
With a great tart apple was my favorite combinations in the world.
Oh.
And whenever I bite into that apple and that piece of cheese now, it's like, there I am, because it was such a harbinger of fall.
Yep.
And in those days, the apples were so, delicious. I mean, you can find great apples now too, but
yeah.
I seem to remember thinking they were even better then.
No, of course. And also the time of year, apples a little later in the season, probably than we're in right now. But you remind me of that very experience, because I had that not necessarily when I was younger, but a kid, but when I was, sort of going through certain food transformations. And that was that juxtaposition of sweet and tart and sharp and different textures as well.
Right. And the crisp air.
Oh.
And the colors on the trees. And it all evokes that whole wonderful thing about fall coming.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. Okay. Well, on that note, I have to thank Jill for this wonderfully improvisatory conversation in which we talked about her background, her food loves, and her extraordinary experiences with food, but also life. I thank you so much, Jill, for being on Cooking by Heart.
Such a pleasure. Thank you. Loved being here.